Hello everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion today, Don't Slap the Messenger, where we will be discussing the impact of abusive legal threats and actions on journalists. My name is Jessica Nivonin. I'm Policy and Campaigns Manager at Index and Censorship, a UK-based organisation that protects and defends freedom of expression worldwide. We're really delighted to have you here with us today to discuss this really rather grim but very important topic. Just a few notes to begin. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to take oral questions, but don't let that stop you from getting your questions in. I know most of you are probably on Twitter, so please tweet us. You can tweet me. My name is on the programme on page 43. Get me there, or else just tweet under the hashtag stop slaps with 2 Ps. Before I introduce and pass on to our esteemed panellists, I want to preface our discussion by answering a question that some of you, maybe most of you, might have, which is, what is a SLAPP? SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, and it's a form of abusive litigation that is used not to right a wrong, but to drain its target of as much time, money, and energy as possible. Such lawsuits are not aimed at pursuing justice, but at silencing, stifling, or punishing the public interest speech that is the lifeblood of our democracies. SLAPPs are invariably taken by wealthy or powerful people who want to keep their illegal or unethical affairs a secret. Donald Trump summarised the aim of a SLAPP quite well when, having filed a lawsuit against a New York Times journalist, he said, "I spent a few bucks on legal fees, they spent a whole lot more. I did it to make his life miserable, which I'm happy about." One of the hallmarks of a SLAPP is the imbalance of power. SLAPP litigants very often sue journalists in an effort to isolate them and intimidate them into submission. 2 journalists that know the impact of SLAPPs all too well are here with us today. Anneli Östlund, a Swedish investigative journalist who writes for the business and finance publication Realtid. Anneli, I should note, has a small issue with her vocal cords, unfortunately, today. So, she's shared some of her notes with me and will share just in case she needs some assistance. We're also joined by Maria Sheresheva, a Bulgarian investigative journalist and freedom of expression advocate. And also, we're joined by Flutura Kusari, legal advisor for the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom, who will, after our journalists have had a chance to give their testimonies, will provide some perspective on what we as civil society organisations are doing and have been doing to stop the scourge of SLAPPs. So, Anneli, first of all, do you want to tell us about your experience? You're currently facing a lawsuit in London.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I will try to do this. I will really try to tell our story, not because of only myself, but because of my colleagues and my family, who is affected as well. My name is Anneli. I'm Swedish. I have a 10-year-old daughter, a husband, and 2 cats. I'm also a freelance financial journalist living in Sweden, writing in Swedish for Swedish-speaking people, doing my job under the Swedish law. But I'm also sued for libel in London. So how did that happen? During my career, I've written a lot about financial crimes and from time to time devoted myself to investigative journalism. Over the years, I have worked a lot with a very capable colleague of mine, Per Agerman. Together, we have been awarded twice and also written a book together. Do you hear this? Is it okay? Okay. In the autumn of 2020, me and Per were hired on a freelance basis by a small financial newspaper, Realtid. We were to form a group engaged in investigative journalism, but ran into some serious difficulties almost immediately. We became interested in a Swedish businessman named Svante Kemlin. He is residing in Monaco since many years and is the founder of a solar energy company named EEW. In the autumn of 2020, a subsidiary of this solar company communicated plans to raise 6 billion Swedish crowns in capital and loans with the help of Pareto, a well-known investment bank. For several reasons, we were surprised that Pareto was involved in this. The company EEV did not publish any financial reports on its website and didn't seem to have much of a track record. So we started to dig into this company and into Svante Kamlin's previous businesses, and we found many strange transactions, some bankruptcies, and a dispute with a large Swedish bank. We asked for an interview, but Mr. Kamlin said no. So instead, we emailed him an extensive question battery. He replied to that mail, saying his lawyers would take it from here. We were contacted by lawyers from London and Monaco. Those from London warned us about defamation lawsuits and high damages. Those from Monaco explained that we risked imprisonment in Monaco, in addition to high damages. Facing these serious threats, we had discussions with Realtid's editor-in-chief, Camilla, and the newspaper's CEO. But in the end, we came to the conclusion that we could not base our publication decisions on whether we were threatened or not. If it's true and relevant, then Realtid must publish. And so we started to publish a series of articles, about 10 or 12, I think. After every article, Mr. Kamlin's lawyers sent us emails saying that the article contained false information. It was often unclear what they meant was false, and they did try to clarify this either. They also stated that the articles was slanderous and that they should be unpublished. Otherwise, their client would sue us for libel. Kamlin also hired a reputable communication agency, Buchanan, that did not answer our questions either. And let me read from an email sent by partner Henry Harrison Topham. On a separate point, whilst I appreciate your journalistic tenacity, I have to say that I am not entirely sure of what you are really trying to achieve with this ongoing litany of questions. As previously outlined to you, EEW's legal team are reviewing everything that you write, so please be mindful of your output and the legal implications that will occur from any misrepresentation of EEW. This was the communication agency. It didn't take many months until Mr. Kamlin, as well as the company EEV, sued us for defamation and demanded damages of 130 million Swedish crowns. He sued me personally, my colleague Per personally, and the editor-in-chief Camilla personally. He also sued my newspaper Realtid. And I don't know about you, but damages of 130 million crowns would at least put me into personal bankruptcy, and also the newspaper Realtid. Worth noting is that Mr. Kamlin and his company EEW is suing us in London and not in Sweden, which one might think is strange, because we are writing in Swedish for Swedish readers under the Swedish law. But for Svante Kamlin, there are a lot of advantages to suing us in London. Defending oneself in court in London is 10 times more expensive compared to Sweden. It could cost around £1 million. So just to finance lawyers and defense is extremely challenging for a small newspaper like us. We also have the fact that Swedish journalists We are not familiar with British defamation laws. We have no idea how it works. There are several differences compared to the Swedish system. And one very important difference is that in Sweden, only the responsible publisher can be held accountable for what is published. So if you want to silence and punish a Swedish journalist in court, you have to drag that journalist out of the country to a court in another country. So to conclude, under the Swedish law, Svante Kamlin could not have sued me and my colleague Per. He had in Sweden. He had to do it in another country. And you can tell the British government and Prime Minister Boris Johnson that I do not appreciate that you allow UK to be a mecca of SLAPPs. I prefer to have my articles evaluated under the Swedish law in a Swedish court, since I'm living in Sweden, writing in Swedish for the Swedish market. Now it has been almost 1.5 years since this started, and we still don't have a verdict. It may take several more years before we know the final outcome. Until then, this process will be hanging over our heads. A lot of people are involved. Svante Kamlin has engaged a famous barrister, Jonathan Price. Mr. Price is perhaps most famous for acting on behalf of the family of the Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. Daphne was exposed to many slaps until she finally was killed in a car bomb attack. We, me, Per, and Camilla, have received support from dozens of NGOs which have signed petitions, amongst them Reporters Without Borders, and we are very, very grateful for that. But what we were most in need of when this happened were financing and lawyers. Without getting into details out of consideration of the ongoing process, we received extremely valuable help from Index on Censorship and Jessica here. She was our lifeline. We have also had such a great support from our barrister Greg Callas and solicitor Rupert Cowper-Coles. And before I finish, I have to admit that all of this would be much easier if I didn't have a husband and a 10-year-old daughter who would be affected if I went bankrupt. I often wonder what they would say if we had to get rid of our house. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Anneli, for that testimony and for your ongoing bravery, because we're still waiting for the verdict. There was the jurisdiction hearing in Anneli and her colleague's case last March, jurisdiction verdict that we're waiting on still, so that could come any day at this stage. And just for our international, given we have an international audience, 130 million Swedish krones is approximately 13 million pounds, isn't that right? Yeah. Great. So now we can maybe pass on to you, Maria. So like Anneli, you have previously experienced a SLAPP, and SLAPPs are also a problem in Bulgaria, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Jessica, for this opportunity. Thank you all for being today with us and coming here to listen to our stories. Thank you, Jessica, also for chasing me for so much time to speak about this case. It's the first time I speak about it publicly. Maybe the main reason is that we journalists, we like to talk about the stories that we cover, but we are not very comfortable talking about our own stories. It's not the core of our profession, but sometimes we have to. So as my story comes from the Balkans, it's upside down from what you've heard so far. It's related to an article that the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, where I was working at that time, published in, I think it was 2017. A little bit of context for the article. It was a part of a series of investigation Bern was doing into arms trade from the Balkan countries to the war in Syria and other armed conflicts in the Middle East. Actually, an award-winning series and internationally recognized. So the article I was part of, because we were actually four journalists that work on the story. I would like to mention their names: Ivan Angelovsky, Jelena Chosic, and Lawrence Marzuk. I also mentioned because I received incredible support from my colleagues throughout this whole process, which was very important actually for the outcome. So we published a story together about showing the route of one Serbian heavy machine gun. It was produced in Zastava factory in Serbia, and it was the first time that we managed to track the route of such a weapon from produced in the Balkans and how it reached the Syrian conflict and ended up in the hands of a rebel from the Free Syrian Army. Why is it important? Because in words, nobody was arming Syrians at that time. And usually this goes through the diversion of these weapons. So the route was it was produced in Serbia. Then it was bought by a Bulgarian arms dealing company called Bulgarian International and Engineering Management (BM), and found by Bulgarian influential businessman Petar Manjukov, a person who previously had links to the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which is the successor of the Bulgarian Communist Party, which never really reformed itself, and a former state security agent. All of this was revealed through our investigation, through work with public sources. The Bulgarian security archive is open for citizens and journalists who want to find out more. So anyway, we published this story, of course, and then this. So this is completely legal, what's going on. I mean, I want to make it clear that we didn't claim that the company or its founder done anything illegal. We just wanted to inform the public about how arms from these super important sectors, actually, for Bulgaria, Serbia, and other Balkan countries, which basically feed whole regions, what happens to them and where do they end. So usually these weapons were bought with end-user certificate Saudi Arabia, and then from Turkey and from Saudi Arabia, they made their way through the rebels who were trained in a training camp in Turkey. So this story managed to reveal this whole interesting path of this arm. So our claim is that actually this diversion in the end is the problematic thing, and the public can judge on the morals of the whole process. So in the end, of course, we asked several times all the actors involved for comment. We sent tens of emails to the companies involved, the governments involved. On the Bulgarian side, we never received any answer, but all of the parties involved were completely aware of what we are going to publish, and they had chances to respond. We published the article, then we received letter from the company that wanted a right to reply. We replied. We published it as the ethical codes, journalistic ethical codes foresee. And then what was strange is that the communication started after the publication. We had some calls, we had some meetings that came before the start of the lawsuit. We couldn't resolve the communication outside of court because I would call them a little bit intimidating. And then the whole thing ended up in court. What is interesting is that this was an international publication in English, but I was taken to court in Bulgaria individually. And from the whole communication, everything was targeting me as the problem, not the team, not the media. It was like the whole message was on me. And it took 3 years in court. The lawsuit was, it wasn't for so much money, luckily, as analysts. It was for 50,000 leva. It's around 25,000 euros. It doesn't sound that much, but actually for the Bulgarian economic and media environment is something that could cause you some trouble. We finally reached a settlement. So we published some additional information and we reached a settlement. But it took 3 years. It took a lot of appealing, a lot of communication. Why do things ended up, I think, on a positive note? I mean, we could have went to the end, actually, with my lawyer. I want to also mention his name, Alexander Kashimov. He's one of the most prominent Bulgarian lawyers that deals with tens of SLAPPs against Bulgarian journalists and activists. I was just tired. And it could have taken a few more years until we finally resolved that. So we decided to settle. I'm not really happy about this, personally, you know, because this is a very exhausting and intimidating process. Because Jessica asked many times, how does this affect the lives of journalists? Also, one of the other reasons we wanted to settle was that it all started when I was expecting my daughter. And the whole process was going on when, you know, I had a kid, I had to take care of it, and this thing was looming over the whole time, of course, affecting the well-being of my family. But also it's time-consuming. I mean, when it drags for years, you start forgetting about what was the context. You've worked on so many things after that, plus you have your family life at the same time. So every time you have new hearings, you have to work again on everything, and it's of course stressful. But just one last line, why do I think that things ended up positively was because of the huge support I received from my colleagues. Although the case was against me individually, and the media could have refrain from it, something which actually happens in Bulgaria a lot. I mean, the media doesn't back up the journalists in such a situation, and you're left alone. In my case, my editors were coming to the meetings in Bulgaria before actually things ended up in court, and they also came to the first hearing to testify. They were super prepared, and all the time it was considered as our case, not as my case. And I think this is super important for journalists to know that they are not alone in this process, which can actually make you close yourself and hide. But in my case, this solidarity, I think it played the main role. Also the media, although I was on a maternity leave and then I didn't return, this was not the reason. I mean, I just continued my professional life in another way. The media backed me up and covered my expenses, and they were all the time standing behind me and considering it a case against the media, not against the individual journalist. But unfortunately, this individual approach is very widespread in Bulgaria, and I think it's also because quite opposite to Anneli, where they have one of the freest media environments in Europe. In Bulgaria, it's exactly the opposite. We're at the bottom of the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index. So the intimidation of journalists is very widespread. We also have a very corrupt and ineffective legal system. So I think that powerful people would prefer to go on us in Bulgarian courts. Although in my case and in many other cases, they don't resolve in the interest of the other side, which is kind of a relief and is positive. And I hope that we are in the process of establishing proper legal practice in this field, so that actually SLAPPs can be recognized as such. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Maria. And you focused, you really made clear there the isolating tactic of a SLAPP as well, the fact that it's kind of destined to isolate you, but it's so great to hear that in your case that wasn't the case, that the solidarity of journalists helped to kind of see you through, which is really important. But I think as well for those freelance journalists who are very often the investigative journalists who are affected by SLAPP, they don't have the backing of any media companies, and therefore every minute that they are forced to spend defending their case are minutes where they're not actually earning any money, right? So again, it's a reason to maybe settle or to try to finish the case early as well, which is not in the interest of media freedom and not in the interest of justice or in the interest of democracy as well, of course. So Flatura, turning to you, our organisations have been working together on SLAPPs for several years at this stage. Maybe you can give a little bit of an outline about what we've been doing and how far we've come so far.
Thank you, Jessica. I have 5-6 minutes to provide an overview of the work we've been doing in the last 3 years, so I'll try to do my best. Let me start by sharing our motivation as to why we have been countering SLAPPs or trying to counter SLAPPs. We believe that we should not live in a world where journalists, activists, professors will have to be afraid of baseless legal actions every time they publish a report, every time they organize a protest, or every time they publish academic research. In a worst scenario, we don't want to live in a world where journalists would refrain from reporting a story out of fear of baseless legal actions. If we allow this, the strategy of powerful businessmen, politicians, corporations, and their lawyers to abuse judicial systems and legislation to stop public participation would work. The good news is that we're fighting back. And by we, I mean around 100 organizations across Europe, including activists, many excellent lawyers, and good politicians. We've all joined forces, if nothing else, to create obstacles for SLAPPers. Our work has been focused on 3 main pillars. The first one is documentation of SLAPPs. The second one is advocacy. And the third one is offering practical support for SLAPP victims. It all started when Daphne Caruana Galizia was assassinated. As the information about her was emerging, we realized that she was facing around 50 active defamation lawsuits. We knew that this was a problem. What we didn't know back then, but we have more information now, is whether other journalists were facing the same legal risks. Based on the documentation that we've been doing in the last 3 years, we know we have enough evidence that this is a widespread problem across Europe. To mention a few examples, Gazeta Joborska in Poland is facing around 60 defamation lawsuits. The same is with index.hr in Croatia. We have many cases in UK. To mention one is Catherine Belton case. We also heard the case of Relkit. We have Bivol in Bulgaria facing SLAPP, EU Observer in Belgium, Time of Malta in Malta, and we have individual journalists in Kosovo, Serbia, Albania, Turkey, Bulgaria, Italy, and other countries facing SLAPPs. How do we know this? We know this because we're using 2 platforms, Mapping Media Freedom, which is run by ECPMF, European Center for Press and Media Freedom, and Council of Europe platform, where we register these cases. We have Jamie here from IPI, who has been documenting cases of SLAPPs in the past years. And you can find a lot of examples online if you're interested in details. We also have more information about these cases thanks to very good research, which was conducted by Index on Censorship, Article 19, we have Roberta here, and many other organizations. Now, as soon as we realized and as soon as we collected enough evidence about this problem, next step was to advocate, to ask those who are in power, those who can address SLAPPs, to do something about it. Initially, it was a conversation of around 5 people with Jessica, Matthew, Tom from CPJ, Sarah. We were discussing whether there is anything that we can do. It was a bit difficult for 2 reasons. One, as you know, most of civil society organizations are small organizations with a lot of work to do, so it was a bit difficult to dedicate a time to this. But also because 3 years ago there was an interest from donors to support this kind of work. It sounded like something very far away, not a big problem, etc. So it was really an initiative of people who, of individuals within organizations who had the support of their organizations to do something about it. And then we had an event, ECPMF organized an event in 2019 in Brussels. We wanted to bring together around 20 people just to see whether there is appetite to discuss this topic. 100 registered, including several members from the European Parliament and other politicians. And we could immediately see that there was interest to understand the problem of SLAPPs and to see whether there are legal solutions. And then we were lucky enough to have Greenpeace International, who has a lot of experience in countering SLAPPs in US. Charlie Holt, he joined us and also managed to create first an online coalition. This was a group of people who came together every Tuesday. We still meet every Tuesday. So Tuesday for us is the anti-SLAPP day, where we were discussing what can be done. We created working groups, one on legal aspects of SLAPPs, one on advocacy, practical support. And as a result of this work, we have managed to mobilize all European institutions in Europe who can address SLAPPs. We have a report, an INI report, own initiative report by the European Parliament asking the European Commission to address SLAPPs. On 27th of April, the European Commission will publish the first legislative package on anti-SLAPP. This is thanks to Madame Vera Jourova, whom we consider a very close friend. She's been working with us, and she promised to Daphne's family that she will address SLAPPs, and she's keeping her promise. We're thankful to her and also to other politicians who have supported our call to address SLAPPs. And we have Council of Europe, which is responding to our call for addressing SLAPPs. There is an anti-SLAPP expert group with the task of providing a recommendation in 2 years. And all in all these institutions are addressing SLAPPs. This started by a very good op-ed written by Madame Dunja Mijatovic, who called for action, the Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner. Now, all this work, of course, we were doing this on the side, discussing with each other. The group was becoming quite a large group, and then eventually we had some states responding. Lithuania government put forward a set of legislative changes in order to counter SLAPPs, and at the same time, we have different working groups in different countries. One in UK, another one in Germany, trying to address SLAPPs at national level. Jessica will tell us more about the UK developments. However, the problem was that at the same time, we had cases of SLAPPs filed against journalists. And it was simply impossible for us to say to journalists, well, wait, we're dealing with this at advocacy level, we'll get back to you in 5 or 10 years' time. They needed practical support, they needed money, and they needed solidarity. For some journalists, issuing a statement co-signed by different organizations, it's quite a big thing. For some other journalists, providing 2,000 euros, 1,000 euros, or 15,000 euros, like we did in several countries, was something that they needed immediately and urgently. Some journalists, they have the support of their rich and big media outlets. Some journalists are left alone. They have to go to court alone because sometimes the media outlet doesn't support them, sometimes they change jobs, and sometimes because they are freelance journalists. So they needed practical support immediately. What we did is we use a media freedom rapid response. This is the project. If you're interested for details, you have leaflets here. This is a project which is run by ECPMF, Article 19, EFJ, IPI, obesity, and other organizations, and we provide practical support. By practical, I mean very practical support. Money to cover lawyers' fees, money if journalists need equipment, if they can't work for several months, they can have some financial support and other types of financial support. Currently, we have 100,000 euros available for legal support. Help us spread the word that there is money available for those facing SLAPPs. We're not doing this alone. Rory Peck Trust, Media Defense, Free Press Unlimited also offer legal support. So it's quite a big coalition of organizations. And we do this thanks to the support of European Commission, National Endowment for Democracy and Justice for Journalists. I will conclude by mentioning two things. One is the case, which is the first and the biggest anti-SLAPP coalition in Europe. It's called The Case. We're on Twitter if you want to follow our work. This is a group of It's basically a structure of this coalition. We work on three pillars: document SLAPPs, build resilience, and advocate for legislative changes. One of our forte is that we make sure to expose SLAPPers, including lawyers. I already mentioned that there are several very good lawyers who have been helping us throughout this journey. But there are also a lot of bad lawyers who are enabling SLAPPs. What we do is we name and shame them. And we will continue to name and shame every single bad lawyer that enables SLAPPs, because they are part of this problem, and we need to expose them. I will conclude by mentioning what are the solutions. We are looking for legislative and non-legislative solutions. To be very brief, there is a long list of requests, but to be very brief, we want the European Commission to enable judges to dismiss SLAPP lawsuits at a very early stage, so that a journalist should not have to wait for years to win his or her case. We want judges to be able to immediately deal with a SLAPP and dismiss the case as soon as possible. Currently, this is not possible because legislation is lacking. So we're calling for that. And secondly, support for SLAPP victims at national level. Yes, you have ECPMF and Rory Peck Trust helping, and FPU trusting helping journalists, but this is not enough. We cannot support every single journalist in Europe, so we need national authorities to also help on that. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Flutura. Checking, it's on, yes. I think that one of the things that you mentioned is how far we've come since the beginning. At the beginning when we started working on SLAPPs, every single time we started the conversation, we needed to introduce the issue. I mean, we still do that anyway because it's still pretty niche, but it was difficult to even get journalists to understand. It was difficult to get them to send us their cases. It was difficult to get them to open up because there's also a trust. We understand that there's a trust issue there and that journalists are taking a risk. Like you, Annalie, and Marie, your case is over now, but your case is still ongoing, Annalie. And when you contacted us for now, you're taking, there's an idea among journalists that speaking out about an ongoing case isn't going to be well seen, maybe by the court. It's not going to be well seen by a judge. It's not going to do you any favors. In reality, our experience as researchers and campaigners on SLAPPs, one of the best ways to fight back is to actually kind of call the SLAPP litigants bluff, because they're doing it to silence you, but you're telling them, well, I'm not going to be silenced. And that means that their SLAPP hasn't worked, because as we say that these lawsuits aren't there to address a genuine grievance, they're there to punish and to stifle freedom of expression. And Flatura, something else you mentioned is about journalists being sued individually. And in many cases we've seen that even if a journalist isn't freelance, even if they work for a media outlet, the SLAPP litigant will sue them individually anyway, so as not to trigger the insurance of, for example, the insurance of the media outlets that they work for. So this is another way of isolating them, which is something that has come up already. So I'm keeping an eye on questions here. That's why I'm not on my phone for any other reason than just to keep an eye on questions. So do send your question in with the hashtag #StopSlaps with 2 Ps. I'm keeping an eye out. We have one already, one question, which I'll get to. But before I do, Flatura mentioned the work that we're doing in the UK as well, that we have set up, because the UK is no longer in the EU, we have set up a separate anti-SLAPP coalition in the UK, which we feel is especially important because of the fact that the UK has been identified as the foremost country of origin for SLAPPs. It's actually our partners, Foreign Policy Centre, has their research has found that the UK is more of after a journalist's home country. The UK is the biggest country of origin after the journalist's home country, but more than the US and the EU combined. So it's a really big problem in the UK, and there's a whole industry there basically aimed at silencing journalists. So the coalition, which Index and Censorship and our partners Foreign Policy Centre set up last January, in January 2021, and we've since been joined by our co-chair, who you mentioned, Flatura, Charlie Holt, who also works at English Pen. Together we have now a coalition of more than 40 representatives from media freedom organisations, anti-corruption organisations, whistleblower transparency organisations, along with individual researchers, academics and media law experts. So already we've published a policy paper in July 2021, and last year as well we published a more detailed proposals for potential reform at what was the first annual UK Anti-SLAPPs conference, which was held in November. But one thing that I would say, especially to those of you who are journalists here, is how important our engagement with journalists has been. It's been absolutely essential to our research and to our campaign. And without your testimonies, we would just simply not be able to work on SLAPPs. So we really encourage journalists who are experiencing abusive legal threats to get in touch with us. Please speak to us. If you have some experience of that, please feel free to speak to us today. We'd be really interested to hear about your experience, especially if you have experience with the UK system, with hearing from UK lawyers. It's particularly important to get in touch now, because the UK government has actually just in the last few weeks published a public consultation on SLAPPs. And so our coalition in the UK, our UK Anti-SLAPPs coalition, will be submitting evidence, but we will also be encouraging and supporting journalists with experience of legal threats and actions in the UK to do the same. And this coalition runs for just over a month, until the 19th of May. That's kind of a couple of the main points about the UK, I suppose. Flatura, you've already mentioned the Council of Europe platform as well, which is one of the mechanisms that we're using to highlight SLAPPs, and indeed all media freedom violations as well. So that's something worth putting on your radars as well, I guess. So going to questions a little bit. So we've already had one question, which I can address a little bit, but I've also already been talking and I'm getting a bit sick of hearing my own voice. So maybe Flatura, I'll let you answer this one first, which is about whether any journalists have countersued after receiving a SLAPP, and if there are any organisations that are helped them to do so, or if that would even be helpful.
Thank you. It's a very valid question. Most of journalists they don't want to engage on new court procedures and lawsuits. That is because it requires energy, it requires funds. So I am not aware of any case where journalists have countersued. They've asked for our advice. My advice is not to engage in such procedures because that would keep them away from what they're supposed to do, which is investigations. On top of this, the funds that we have available, we use this only for cases when journalists are facing legal threats. Because if we spend the available funds on journalists who want to initiate legal actions, then we are afraid that those who need it and those who are obliged to respond to lawsuits, we will not be able to support them. One exception to this is for journalists, especially female journalists, facing harassment, be that online or physical harassment. We have cases of female journalists who have been intimidated and harassed for years, and they need to engage a lawyer so that they file criminal reports and they are in more close contacts with prosecutors and police officers, especially in countries where there is a weak rule of law. So this is one exception, but in principle, the funds available are for journalists who are facing lawsuits. And yes, I think naming and shaming all those that enable SLAPPs, I think is just enough right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rutura. And I think that that's a good point as well, that journalists, after going through such a long, like you said, Maria, after going through such a long process, it's kind of like, enough, I don't want to see the inside of a courtroom for a lifetime, if I can. Do you want to say a word on that too?
One detail about that, I mean, this is very typical for Bulgaria, but I also think other Balkan countries, is that the intimidation doesn't go only in courts or through direct threats. There is a lot of shaming in other media, like so in this case, I think that in Bulgaria there is already a trend of journalists suing other media for libel and succeeding, which is actually a very good strategy, because there are whole like these black PR campaigns against journalists, against public speakers, and this is also because of the bad media environments in these countries. So when like half of the media in the country start publishing bullshit about you, you know that it's not true, but I mean people are reading this, and you know the maxima that when a lie is repeated, I don't know, 10 times, people start believing in it. So I think that in this case, journalists themselves have to start litigations against lies and defamation. And actually, we have some breakthroughs in this practice. Although the propagandists, if I don't know if such a word exists in English. Okay, this propaganda media, they know how to do it. I mean, very often they don't make the direct claim, so it's complicated. But this is something that should not be allowed because it's part of the whole intimidation package.
Jessica, one clarification. I think the question was about countering those who slap a journalist. So my response was, for example, in the case of, in your case, the question was whether you would respond with a lawsuit to those who, yes. So just to clarify, whereas I do agree with you that we are seeing a lot of lawsuits against journalists, sorry, a lot of propaganda, lies, disinformation as a strategy to go after journalists, and I think that's a separate issue, and I agree with you that you need to counter those lies.
Yeah, smear campaigns are also something that we'd consider. If a journalist comes to us and they say, well, I've experienced this, and this, smear campaigns are very often one of them. Another one are kind of extortionate costs, like in Annalie's case. There's another case worth mentioning that's ongoing still in Estonia, where 2 journalists of the national broadcaster there are facing a lawsuit from a Finnish businessman, and he claims that as a result of their investigation that he has encouraged losses of up to €1 billion. So these are, you know, again, as we say, it's not about pursuing a genuine grievance or righting a wrong. It's about intimidating and these are individual journalists. And again, they were sued individually, even though they work for the public broadcaster. Another question that we have from the audience is about whether media organisations do enough to draw attention to individual SLAPP cases and the law firms behind them. Would some sort of Streisand effect help to reduce the likelihood of powerful people launching these lawsuits? I'll throw in my my thoughts on this first, maybe before going to our panel. But I think that there's a need for we want to mobilise journalists kind of in two respects. One I mentioned already, which is actually getting them to speak to us about the legal threats they're facing and lawsuits. But secondly, actually to write about their colleagues, write about, show the solidarity that Maria was shown, to help their colleagues by writing about cases. And this is something that we're only kind of really starting to see change now, especially in the UK. We've seen more coverage of SLAPP cases, fortunately, recently. Such as, Flortura, you mentioned Catherine Belton's case, who wrote the excellent book Putin's People and who faced many lawsuits, which luckily now have been concluded. And there was quite a lot of media attention on her case. The same for Tom Burgess, a Financial Times journalist who he was sued alongside his publisher for his book HarperCollins, and then he was sued alongside the Financial Times as well for several articles he wrote, and there was some media attention on that too. But there's been much less media attention, I think it's fair to say, on your case, Annalie, and that's probably, I think at the moment, a lot of the media focus is understandably and justifiably on SLAPPs being taken again by Russian oligarchs, which is of course topical at the moment, and is a big problem. We are seeing many SLAPPs from Russian oligarchs, but not only. I mean, Russian oligarchs aren't the only ones. We're seeing, politicians and other powerful businessmen are also taking SLAPPs. So I think we do need to encourage media organisations and journalists to write about SLAPPs. Do you guys also want to say a few words about that?
A couple of newspapers wrote about us for a couple of days, but I have to say that I'm a bit disappointed of the support from other newspapers and media, and I think it has to do with they see this is as something out of the ordinary. It doesn't happen in Sweden. It just happened us, and it will never happen again. It feels like they think. So, and also it was our case was very complicated. We had written 12 articles, I think, about complicated transactions, and I don't know if some thought it was, well, we might have had wrong in some ways and he was right in some ways, but I mean, we had 24 NGOs behind us saying this was SLAPP, and they had gone through it. And and once I called a newspaper that in the north of Sweden that I had actually been working for, saying that this is happening and I used to work here. Are you interested? Normally, they do. They are interested in writing about, the people who had moved away and in this local newspaper, but they didn't. And I think in that case, they were afraid of them getting sued. I'm quite sure about that. So they did not write about us, and another newspaper where both me and my colleague Camilla has been working on did not either mention it. So a little bit, I feel disappointed. I do. Because this can happen to them. But at the same time, I guess, does anybody click on this article if I write it? I guess that's the top of a journalist's mind often.
Yeah, and the term SLAPP can kind of be a bit can kind of seem a bit jargony. Lots of people don't like it. Lots of journalists don't like it. They think it's people aren't going to get it. They're not going to understand. And to some extent, we also don't like it. Is that fair to say, Flutura? We have had big discussions about whether, because SLAPP has been imported, it's a term imported from the US, basically, identified by two academics there in the 1980s, and we've kind of adopted it as like the least worst term, but it can be a bit off-putting. Now we have only 6 minutes left, so we need to finish at 1 sharp. But we have one last question from someone in the audience saying about whether their question is about potentially taking a human rights case, calling directly for countries to have anti-SLAPP laws, by arguing, for example, that it's a failure arguing that the failure to have such a law is a breach of the human right to freedom of expression. So actually, just on this, a colleague of mine pointed out this morning that only on the 15th of March, the European Court of Human Rights actually referred to SLAPP for the first time, which is encouraging. And we are, as we mentioned, we are working on getting anti-SLAPP laws over the line at the moment. Flutura, do you want to say, as our legal expert on the panel, do you want to say a few words about this?
Judges were driving that, even though it wasn't formally on the table, and I think that court would uphold that kind of ruling, and I think if the European Court did it, then the whole of the 48 countries or whatever it is would be required to adopt those laws. So it would be a huge thing.
I understand your question. I think it's too early to respond to that question, because what we have from the European Court of Human Rights, first, as you know, a very good case law, so that makes us hopeful. And secondly, this judgment against Russia, where the court gave an indication that we're following the discussions on SLAPPs, and we know about it. And we kind of celebrated that judgment for weeks, because it's a very good signal. I think a good start is, as soon as we have the first EU directive, which will be on 27th of April, and a recommendation from the European Commission, to put pressure on our national governments so that this legislation is implemented at national level. I think that would be a good start, because we've seen with the directive on protection of whistleblowers that some countries have progressed in transposing the legislation, some they have not been that responsive. So I think that would be the first step. And then lastly, I think we should all keep an eye, and we have Article 19 here specialized on third-party interventions. We need to keep an eye on cases before the European Court of Human Rights. And as soon as we see that there is SLAPP there, then through third-party interventions, I think we can try to convince the court to be quite strong against SLAPPs. That would be kind of a first, second step.
Great, thank you, Flutura, and thank you for those questions as well. So we don't have hardly any time left, so we might just wrap up there. But I think it's easy to see why this is an issue that we need to keep an eye on, and why there's still a lot of work to be done. And as I say, if I could just emphasise again, given the opportunity to speak to journalists here in particular, to please do be in touch with us, share our contacts with your colleagues who might be facing legal threats and actions, and please do also spread the word about SLAPPs, because we really want journalists not to feel isolated, that this is not a problem that they're facing individually. This is a problem that we need to face together. So thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks to our panelists as well.